Constitution, but to tell us about something that he feels very passionate about. But Bob, you would take some questions on the Constitution
I'm going to do a little constitutional.
Good, great, because one of our members, Ann Majori, brought her daughter, and that was what she thought it was going to be on. So I'm glad you will throw that in. So please welcome Bob Menges.
I was here a year ago when I was here. I just want to get an idea. That's good, because I've got some of the same material I did last year. I can't come up and present on Convention of States without giving somewhat of a little bit of a constitutional primer. In other words, a basics, a little bit of touch on it just a little bit and go through some basics of separation of powers. Kathy, you're probably the first person I've heard in a long time that knows the difference between a podium and a lectern. I'm an Air Force instructor for many, many years, back to my times when I could duty, and very few people today can make that distinction, so hats off to them.
Well, thank you.
I taught her.
You taught her everything she knows. Okay. I've been going around the state right now teaching and lecturing on this the National Convention of States project. That's probably the first time we've ever used that as the flag to pledge allegiance to, so that's good. That's good. Of course, none of us mean any disrespect by that, but we want to say our pledge of allegiance. But okay, so just a little bit of my background. If you already know this, I don't want to bore you with a resume or anything, but I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do. Over there on the table, there are two cards. There's a card. First of all, I have a paying job. This is not my job. This is a volunteer job. As Kathy said, I'm very passionate about it, and you'll see why as I go through it. But on the side, as a hobby, I teach the Constitution. I've been doing so for about 14 years. This is the 15th year. Constitutional law specifically to a group of homeschool high school kids every year, anywhere from 10 to 15 high school 11th and 12th graders, and I take through a course in that. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, I started speaking on the Constitution, lecturing and teaching. I teach a course in my church and in other churches called the Christian Biblical Worldview of Government, Biblical Worldview Studies or Christian Worldview Studies, specifically on government, what the Bible has to say about government. And I'll just tell you right now tonight, I'm a Christian, and I'm not going to apologize for that, but I don't mean to offend you if you're not a believer tonight. But when I teach government, when I teach the United States Constitution, I only have one place to come from. I have to, because I've got to be faithful to the truth of history and the facts. So that's why I'll be presenting it tonight. But over here on the table, next to the material Convention of States, you'll see two cards. One's my COS card, if you will, the Convention of States card. The other one's my personal hobby card. And the reason I'm telling you to pick up that card is because that's got my website on it. And on my website, there is a 12-hour or a 12-session course that I do in churches, and we videotaped it 1 year. So you can go on there and look at it if you want to. If you get tired of hearing me blather, you can shut it off on YouTube. You know, it's free. The reason I say take the card or take a couple of them is because a lot of times you people are here tonight because you care about what's going on in our government. You care about conservatism and limited government. And you run into people that don't or don't know or they're not knowledgeable on it as you are. Hand them the card or tell them about the website because they can go take a course on the Constitution right on there. And they can take it at their leisure. They can start and stop it whenever they want. But I got into that about 15 years ago, and I started doing that about 8 years ago. I was teaching my class one night in a social hall just like this in my church. And it's a year-long course from September to May. Once a week I meet with these kids for an hour and a half, and they're going through a college textbook, constitutional law. And we go through about 30 Supreme Court cases that are designed or put in the textbook specifically to teach the separation of powers and different things that have happened and what the court has said and what the court has done. And then you also get to learn the Constitution because you're dissecting as you go through. But there's a place in that course where I teach the First Amendment. I go through the Bill of Rights, but the First Amendment, the religion clauses, the free exercise clause, the establishment clause. And that particular night, I was teaching on the establishment clause. And some of you or all of you may know that the establishment clause today, as with most of the rest of the Constitution, has been so perverted that anything that anybody does in government that even smells like religion is struck down by the courts. And at that particular night, 8 years ago, at that time, Tim Scott was a Charleston County councilman. And he had put for those of you who lived here for a long time, you'll remember this, he put the 10 Commandments up on the wall, just like Roy Moore had done with the big monument. He put a plaque up on the wall of the Charleston County Council. And that was up there for a while. It created a big brouhaha, as you could expect, with the American Civil Liberties Union, Communist Lawyers Union, whatever you want to call it. And eventually Charleston County just said, listen, you got to take it down. So I was using that example that night to teach the Establishment Clause to these students. And I'm in the middle of teaching that, and I was using Tim as an example. This is 7 or 8 years ago. And on the back door, right at the back of the social hall, just like this in my church. And I hold on to class, I walk over the door, I open the door, and I'm facing this bald-headed black man. And I recognized him as Tim. I've seen him before. He's an Allstate insurance agent, and kind of perplexed. So I literally had just spoken his name. And I opened the door, and there he is, and he's like, hey, I'm here for this. He lives in Northwood Estates, which is right down the street from my church, Northwood Baptist. And he was coming for their homeowners association meeting. They use our social hall once a month on Thursday nights. And he was there, and he said, here for the homeowners association meeting. I said, I know you're Tim Scott. I said, but that's next Thursday night, because I know the schedule, because I got to get out of that room on that night. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry for, I said, I'm teaching a class, I'm so sorry for interrupting. I said, you're not going to believe this. But I was just talking about you. And he had this really perplexed look on his face. And he goes, what are you talking about? I explained it to him, and we were both kind of like, amazed at this. And I said, well, you're here, why don't you come in and talk to the students about it? So anyways, long story short, he comes in, talks to the students, we have a great discussion about what exactly had happened. And my daughter, my oldest daughter, who's now graduated from high school and graduated from college, was in my class that night. She was a senior. And she, on the way home, so all the students thought I'd set it up. And on the way home, she said, Dad, I know you won't tell us the students, but you set that up, right? I said, I did not set that up. I didn't set it up. And to make a long story short, it was a providential meeting, I'm convinced, that God had designed between me and now Senator Tim Scott. We became great friends. Fast forward to when he runs for Congress in 2010, he asked me if I would mentor him on the Constitution. Not that I'm anything special, but he knew that I've been studying and teaching it for a long time, and that's where my expertise lies. So we met at a Barnes & Noble on Rivers Avenue every Saturday morning for about 3 months. And that's the kind of man that Senator Scott is, a humble man. A lot of people running for federal office wouldn't ask somebody to help them. And we sat down and we went through some of the things I'm going to show you tonight. Article 1, Section 8. Here's where your authority comes from, Tim. You have no authority except what's in Article 1, Section 8. You can't do anything that's outside of Article 1, Section 8, because when you take an oath to it, you can't do anything else if you're going to follow that oath. And so anyways, that started a long friendship. We did that, and of course, you know the rest of the story. United States Senator today. Last year, right about this time, I was thinking about running for Congress when he was appointed to the Senate. And after my wife and I prayed about it, we decided it wasn't the right time. And I teamed up with my friend Curtis Bostic. I was his senior campaign advisor. So we kind of ran as a team together. And for those of you that pay attention, that was 16 people in a race for Congress. Incredible. But anyway, so I do that. I speak in churches. I speak to groups like this because I care deeply about the United States Constitution and specifically what the founders did. And the reason I do that is because of this. If I can get this little clicker to work right here. Is because of the idea of the rule of law comes from, it's a biblical principle. It comes straight from the scriptures. And I guess this is going to give me trouble tonight, but I want you to look at this one passage of scripture tonight. It's the only passage of scripture I'm going to share with you tonight. But it's crucial as somebody, if you're a constitutionalist in here tonight, if you're a constitutionalist and you're a Christian, it is as crucial. If you're not a believer, then that's okay too. Our country is not based on a theocracy. The founders understood that you can't force people into a specific religion. They wanted liberty for everybody. Okay, but if you're a Christian here tonight, I want you to understand, this is absolutely crucial for you to understand as a believer. Romans chapter 13 says this. It says, every person is in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will see condemnation upon themselves. I will tell you, and I will just throw this out there tonight. You don't have to agree with me, but just hear me out. I'm going to submit to you that a lot of believers, a lot of Christians, and I would even go as far as to say most, but maybe that's too bold, have got a wrong interpretation of this passage of Scripture right here. And here's why. Every person is in subjection to the governing authorities. Who is the governing authority in our country? Who is it? The people? Some people will say the president. Some people will say the Congress. Every once in a while I'll get people to say the judiciary, and I really scratch my head on that one. But to be honest with you, it's really not even the people. And you're probably aghast at that. Okay? We know we the people is how it starts out. But here's the deal. The United States Constitution is the highest law in our land. When that Constitution was ratified and codified, and when our people take an oath to it, there is a reason why they're taking an oath to it, because it's above them. As a Christian, my highest law is God's law. Well, we're not a theocracy, as I just said a moment ago. What I would submit to you and show you, and I don't have the time to do it tonight, I do it in a 12-week study, is to show you that when you look at the foundation of our country, when you look at the biblical underpinnings, where the founders got their ideas, and I know people come up, they have all kinds of debates about this guy wasn't a believer, this Christian, this guy was a deist, this guy was this guy was that. I've read them extensively. I didn't get off the bus yesterday. But honest people can disagree. I would submit to you the vast majority of them were Bible-believing Christians. But if I'm wrong, what I would tell you is that most of them, if not all of them, had more of a biblical worldview of looking at things through the lens of the Scripture than most Christians do today. Because their minds were washed in it. That's how they learned how to read. They did everything with the Bible. So they had these principles inculcated in them. And I would submit to you that those principles birthed our United States Constitution. Matter of fact, I heard a guy the other day recently say that the United States Constitution is not Scripture, but it came from the bosom of Scripture. And I can buy that. It's certainly not Scripture. It's not canon. We can't put it obviously above there. It was written by men. It was written by fallible men, men that were sinners just like me. They can make mistakes, and I make mistakes all the time. But what I want to submit to you is that this has a particular application in the United States of America. If you were in Iran, whoever the leader is in Iran, that's the governing authority. If you were in Saudi Arabia, it's King Fahd. He's the governing authority. If you were, just pick one, sort of leaders. In the United States of America, it's unique. It's unique. It's not a man. And it's not you and I, although we were the ones that were vested into that Constitution. But once it was ratified, it became the highest law. And here I can prove this to you about why it's really not we the people. One more quick illustration. In 2010, I was at a Tea Party rally in Columbia. And Jeff Duncan was running for Congress in 2010. One of our finest congressmen in this state. And we have some good ones. Jeff Duncan was running. He was campaigning. After he was done, because I'm a constitutional geek, I made a beeline across the plaza outside the State House to Jeff. And I went up to him and I said, Jeff, I'm Bob Menges. He doesn't know me from Adam. I said, hey, just got a question for you. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if you get elected, I said, where will your authority come from? And I could see this, like Star Wars, Star Trek, the shields go up. It's almost like he was thinking, oh, this guy's going to try to put me on the evening news and make me say something stupid. And I saw it in his eyes, and I said, no. I said, I'm not anybody important. My passion is for the Constitution and understanding. And I said, where will your authority come from if you are elected? And he looked at me, and there was a crowd of people behind him, and he pointed at him, and he goes, those people. And I said, nope. I said, it really won't. I said, because when you raise your right hand, you're going to take an oath to the United States Constitution. And then every single one of the people in your district call you up and say, Congressman Duncan, we would like you to introduce a bill to, you fill in the blank. Give us a free car every 2 years. Every single person in your district calls you up and asks you to do it. That's the people. Are you going to obey those people? And the light bulb went on. Him and I have actually joked about this since then. He remembers it. And because he's going to take an oath to abide by the Constitution. And in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 says 17 things that a federally elected representative, congressman or senator, can legislate and to appropriate money for. That's it. We're way beyond that today, but I'm telling you what's in the Constitution. And when you take an oath to it, you're swearing that you're going to uphold what's in that Constitution. Not what they tell you. And see, a lot of times we get this wrong. People think, well, our congressman doesn't listen to me. Well, the only time he should be listening to you is when you're in compliance with the Constitution. Or unless you're asking him to do something that the Constitution is silent on. Then it's okay for your opinion too. But if you ask him to do something that violates the Constitution, he can't do it. Not if he took an oath to that. And we need to understand that as conservatives. We point the finger at liberals because they abuse it all the time. And then our guys sometimes will look the other way when they do it. We can't do that. That's hypocrisy. So anyways, and I met Jeff at last year's Tea Party, and I reminded him of that story. He turned beet red in his face. He remembered it. It was interesting. But anyways, in our country, the governing authority is not a man. It's the United States Constitution. Very important thing to understand. And I have this up there emblazoned on there, the rule of law. And I have a phrase, 2 words up here called lex rex. Lex rex is a Latin term. Anybody know what that stands for? There's a famous, law is king. Lex rex. Rex being king, lex being law. It was written in the mid-1600s by one of the reformers, by a guy named Samuel Rutherford. And Rutherford wrote a book called Lex Rex, and today, if we say that law is king or law is higher than men, most of you would go, okay, move on, Bob, what's the big deal? We know that, we understand that. Back in that day, that was a radical thing to say. You get your head cut off for that because it was Rex Lex. It was the other way around. King was law. Whatever the king said was law. This is a bedrock principle for anybody that's a constitutionalist to understand that in our country, under our Constitution, law is king, not man. We have a president today that's acting like he's king. Some people call him the imperial president because of that, because of his dictates. Law is above him. And it should be extremely egregious to the American citizenry when we watch anyone, not just the president. He's not, and by the way, this isn't to beat up on the president, because there's lots to beat up on him on. Prior presidents have done the same thing. We've just never seen it at the torrid pace that we're at right now with this president. But to basically understand constitutionalism, you've got to understand that law is king. Lex Rex, law is king. And it also goes back, I'm just going to bring that back up. It goes back, I want to run that into the ground with you, but you've got to understand that that's our governing authority right there. This is, some of you might have heard me say this before if you were here before, but I cannot help bring this up whenever I teach about the Constitution. And that is, this is a quote that I have up here. It's on the back of my card. I encourage you, if you don't get my card for anything else, and again, I'm selling nothing on my website. All of what I'm doing is volunteer. On the back of my card is that quote. I think it's good for you to have in your back pocket because it's very instructive when you're trying to teach or help other people understand conservatism, constitutionalism. This was a guy named George Nicholas. Nobody knows him today. Nobody's heard of this guy, unless you're a real constitutional geek like me. But this was a delegate to the Virginia Ratification Convention in 1788. So the Constitution was drafted from May to September of 1787. It was sent out to all 13 state legislatures, and in Virginia, the Ratification Convention is taking place. I was just talking to this gentleman here a little while ago. We're talking about people often say, politics is so rancorous today, and we need to return to a time that was more civil. People have to study history. Politics has never been civil. And at this convention right here, there was heated, rancorous debate taking place because of the differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Now, the Federalists were those, all of them understood that the Articles of Confederation, for the most part, were a failure. Matter of fact, I've had people tell me, well, that's kind of a bold thing to say. No, we know they were a failure. That's why it was imperative for changes to be made to the Articles. The Articles of Confederation, so 1787 is four years north of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, the end of the Revolutionary War. And by the way, if you haven't studied or heard anything about the Revolutionary War, we won the Revolutionary War because of God's providential hand, not because we have a superior army. No way. Okay, it should have never happened. You can't miss that. There's a book written by David McCullough, who's not writing specifically from a really overtly Christian perspective. He's a great historian, and he can't turn away from it. He uses the word providence over and over in his book called 1776. But so 3 years past the Treaty of Paris, this nation is coming apart at the seams. Under the Articles of Confederation, it's a very, very loose confederation. There's no separation. There's only one branch. There's a Congress, the Continental Congress. I don't want to go into too much of that with you, because I'll eat up all the rest of my time. But you need to understand this as a premise for where I'm going. That under the Articles, there was no ability to tax, and all of us today would clap, right? We would. But reasonable people understand we've got to have some taxes. But because of what we're looking at today, we gag at the thought of taxes. But back then, they couldn't even pay the Continental Army. The commerce between the states was a huge reason that led to the Philadelphia Convention, actually the Annapolis Convention prior to that gave us our Constitution today. So the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists both understood that there needed to be a stronger central government. So that's why you have a little primer on the Articles of Confederation, a little background. They both understood that. The Federalists were those people that said, were people like Madison and those that has to be, we've got to codify this and make the central government stronger. The Anti-Federalists understood that, but they were very, very leery of putting too much power in the central government. Today, I would say they were prophetic. Okay? Or just looking around. But that's the debate. People today, I've heard people simplistically say, oh, Federalists, Anti-Federalists, Republican, Democrat. No! Not even close. Even the most ardent anti-federalist today woke up and he wanted to tar and feather some people. No question about it. So there's heated debate between those two parties. I'll cut to the chase. This guy stands up, Nicholas stands up in the midst of that, And he says this right here. He says that enlightened people will never suffer what was established for their security to be perverted to an act of tyranny. And enlightened people, the reason I have that bolded in red, because that's the key word right there. Nicholas says, listen, I'm gonna ad-lib for him here in 2014 vernacular. Chill out, everybody. Don't worry. Don't worry. You all that are worried about vesting too much power, it'll never be a runaway central government, because an enlightened people will never let that happen. They'll never let the Constitution, because it's being established for their security, be perverted to an act of tyranny. And enlightened people will never do that. I would submit to you today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very unenlightened citizen. For lots of reasons. Common Core is going to accelerate that. They're not teaching the Constitution in schools. They're not teaching separation of powers. They're not teaching limited government. People say, well, that's a Republican thing. No, limited government is a constitutional thing. It's right there in the Constitution. So if you teach the Constitution, you're going to come away with limited government. And our public schools don't want students to come away with that. And I'm not talking about teachers. I have some friends that are great teachers that are busting their rear ends in the public school system. They're doing their very best. They're in a system that is rigged against them. And it's accelerating being rigged against them with Common Core. But this is huge right here. He stands up and he says that. So why is this important? Because if we're not an enlightened people, and that's an 18th century term. Today you're probably wondering why enlightened. Today we can translate that as a knowledgeable people. And he's talking about the Constitution, not about rocket science. Okay? And we are very ignorant people today. I don't use that word to be disparaging of people. Ignorant is not a bad word. I'm ignorant of how to mix rocket fuel. You don't want me mixing rocket fuel. Okay? But as citizens of our country, this country was never intended to be stewarded by an ignorant citizen. Never. The Constitution was meant for people. It was written in the common vernacular today. People tell me today, well, it's kind of hard to read. It was written in the language, in the dialect, the vernacular, the speak of the common farmer in 1787. Just put this up here. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Jefferson, most of you probably know this, but it's worthwhile to stop and pause and look. It's a heavy price to be vigilant. To do that, like you're here tonight because you're vigilant. The vast majority of our citizenry are not being vigilant. The reason that stuff is wrong, people ask me, my high school students, when they get to about the middle of the year, which is right now we're past it, and the light bulbs start going on about December, January. And I'm showing them stuff that's going on. One of the things that's easy to show, the things that are being violated in the Constitution today. And I'll have students go, Mr. Menges, if what you're saying is true, as if I'm lying to them, they don't mean it. It wasn't funny. If what you're saying is true, then why are they doing it? The they is, you name the congressman, the president, whoever, the judiciary. If what you're saying is true, why are they doing this? And you know what the answer is? By the middle of the year, you know what they tell me is the answer? They say George Nicholas. They've learned that the reason the things are the way they are today is because of us. We're an unvigilant people. We're an unenlightened people. And not today, we haven't been protecting our freedom. Because of lots of things. But I think it always goes back to George Nicholas, an unenlightened citizen. We'll never let that happen. Real quickly, I said I'm going to do a constitutional primer before I go into the COS project and explain that to you. Because they did have some basics of it here. But the relationship between liberty and order, there is a direct relationship between liberty and order. And what I'm saying is, again, as constitutionals, there's principles we need to understand. That is, whenever a law is written and passed, you give up something. And we as a people, we understand to have an ordered society, we have to give up some of our liberties. You've given up the liberty to drive through the red light out there because you want order on the street out there. So the law says you have to stop at the red light and go on the green light. So that's a law that did that. That law took away some of your liberty. Now, being silly with an extreme example right here, but any law that you can think of is going to strip you of liberty. And the reason it's crucial to understand that principle is so that you can be vigilant to protect it. People always say, I have people tell me that, matter of fact, I heard a Republican, I'm not going to say his name, ask me afterwards and I'll tell it to you, because maybe I'll offend you. There's a local Republican. I'm going to be him, he serves on county council right now. And he put on his Facebook about 6 months ago, something to the effect of, it was a picture that he took, and it says something about, we need, I can't remember, the gist of what it was we need people that will do more. I don't want people doing more, making laws. I want them making less laws. Because that's a fundamental misunderstanding. If they're making laws all the time, they ought to be actually undoing law. We have so much law in the book. We're so regulated right now. But that's, for a conservative to make a statement like that, it's like, I'm not sure he understands limited government. We don't need guys in Columbia making more and more laws. We make, like, passing laws to de-restrict laws, like S308, the restaurant carry bill. I'll toot my own horn here. I wrote that bill 3 years ago. I wrote that bill. It took me 3 years to get that bill passed. And that bill doesn't take away liberty. We fought like tooth and nail. I was going to say we fought like something else. We fought like tooth and nail to get a piece of our liberty back so that those that have a concealed weapons permit in South Carolina can carry a weapon in a restaurant or an establishment that serves alcohol, which is most of your restaurants. And we fought tooth and nail to do that. We're talking about Tom Corbin, how hard it is to pass laws to do things. It's extremely difficult. So when Jefferson says the price of liberty is eternal vigilance, when you lose it, it's extremely hard to get back. That's what we need to remember. You know, it's easy to lose it. You can lose it overnight, but it's extremely difficult to get it back. Anyways, this is what happened. The states created the federal government. We need to understand this. Most of you in here probably understand this. You need to be able to explain that to people. The states created the federal government. The federal government is a child. It's a creation of the states, if you will. They seeded up limited sets of powers. And the way I explain this to my students is that picture a bucket of powers. That bucket has a bunch of little powers in it. The Constitution is a set of bylaws. In 1787, they needed a stronger central government. They needed to give certain powers to a central government that they had designed. So what the states did at that time, 13 states, reached into a bucket and they took out certain powers and they seeded them up to a central government. So they went through and they said, okay, we've got to have a referee for commerce because commerce, the states are warring economically. That's why the articles were a failure. There was no central referee, and each state was warring against each other economically, and they were going to go down. And remember, Britain is right across the ocean, come right back across, and would easily have taken back the territory that was lost to them in 1781 and 83. So they're going through this bucket and said, commerce, the power to regulate commerce, we're going to give that to the mothership. This power over here, yep. This power, no, not that one. We're leaving that for the states. This one here, and not that one, not that one, not that one. This one here. So they seeded up a set of powers. They carved out a subset of agreed upon. That's crucial to understand that the United States Constitution, these little pocket things, think about this for a minute. The entire manual for our United States government fits in this thin little book. That's it. People, think about it, staggering for a moment. Look at the Leviathan, bloated behemoth federal government today that's way outside of its boundaries. The vast majority of which is not in here. How did it get that big when it was meant to be this big? How did it get this big? My students would tell you George Nicholas and unenlightened people did that. Okay. Madison says every single word of the Constitution ultimately decides a question between power and liberty. Crucial to understand about the Constitution. Real quickly, just a diagram to show you this. Our Constitution is made up of 4 parchments about this big. You can see them if you go to the National Archives. Animal skins, if you will. If you look at the 4 parchments, what I've shown here is I've broken down the Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 branch of government. And I think as constitutionalists, we ought to speak constitutional language. Bob, you're being a little bit picky right here. It's the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. But you need to know, my students, on the second night of class, the second week of class, they have to have that memorized. What's Article 1, what's Article 2, and Article 3. Most people in our populace today have no clue.